Hello and welcome to the Excel VBA Objects Series. In this series we are looking at each of the VBA objects individually, and in this video we'll start with the range object. But it's probably going to take a couple of videos because the range object is the most important object of them all, and there is a lot to cover. The range object is probably the most used Excel object among them all. It represents a cell, a column, a row, or a group of cells within the Excel worksheet. In this video we will mostly look at how to reference, how to target the range object. So let's go to the Visual Basic Editor. And as you probably know, we reference the range object with range, parentheses and double quotations, and the range with column letters and row numbers. So let's say we want to target the range A1 to D4. As you see, when we add the dot, we get all the properties and methods of the range object. Let's say we want to select this range. We can select multiple groups of cells or multiple ranges, separating the range with a comma. So for example, if we want to select this range here and also this one down here, we would write G2 to H3, comma, G6 to H11. Let's run the macro. And as you see, we have selected two groups of cells. We can also select a single cell with range. So for example, if we want to get the category here, which is in G3, we would write range G3. And note that this is a merged cell and we have to refer to the first cell. But there's another way to target a single cell, and that's with the cells property of the range object. The cells property has another item property that accepts the row index and the column index in parentheses, but we can actually omit that property and use directly cells with the row index and the column index. In this case, if we want to get to the same cell as above, we should write first the row index, in this case is 3, comma, the column index as a number, and in this case is 7 for column G, and we could select or use any other property or method of the range object. Now, as I said earlier, the range object is a property of the worksheet object, so any of these apply to the active sheet. But if we want to refer to a range in another sheet, we need to specify that sheet in any of the ways that we've seen in a previous video about the worksheet object. So if we have another sheet here, let's call it other data. We could refer to a range in that other sheet with either the sheet object name, which is sheet 2, or the name in the sheet, so that would be then sheets other data. And as we've seen in the previous video, we can use sheets or we can use worksheets. But if we don't specify anything, that applies to whatever is the active sheet at that moment. So that would be the same as writing active sheet.range select. So in this case, as we are in the other data sheet, all of those would actually target a range in that particular sheet. Let's go back to the other sheet. We can target a named range using the named range inside the quotation. So that would be named range dot select or whatever. And a named range is defined here, is a defined name, and you can see those in the name manager. We don't have any as of now. And do not confuse this with using a variable to store the range. That would be, for example, declaring up here a variable as myRange as a string. Then we would say myRange equals A1 to H8, and we could use my range here and select. So if we run the macro, you see we've selected A1 to H8. But there is yet another way to refer to a range, and that's using object variables. So instead of declaring my range as a string, we would do my range, and I'm going to call it object, as a range object. And in this case, we need to set my range object as whatever range we want to use, and that could be actually my range or any other. Let's say we do now a 1 to D10, and now we can use my range object as an object and apply any of the properties and methods of the range object. So let's say we select this one now. If we run the macro, you see now we have selected the range A1 to D10. So as you see, there are several options. You have to pick the one that fits better. Let me add some commentary here. So this one selects a named range or define name. Okay. This one or this one selects just one cell. This one here selects multiple groups of cells. And then to select a cell, we have three possibilities or three options. Let's say option 1 is this one where we use the range as it is. Then we have option 2 where we need to declare a string variable, and I'm going to put it here. Assign the range address to that variable, and then we can refer, for example, we can select that range. And option 3 is with an object variable. We have to declare that variable as a range object, and then we set that object to the range, and that would be in the active sheet, but we can refer to any other worksheet as well. And then we work with the object as with any other range. We can select or use any other properties or methods. Now, there are several properties to target a specific range, and we're going to look into that now. We can refer an entire column with the range object as A, for example, that would reference the entire column A. If we select that, we get the entire column A. And we can do the same with an entire row. But alternatively, we can use the columns and rows property of range object, which returns a column or a row object itself. And the same that we've done, it could be achieved with columns A. Exactly the same outcome. We could also say columns 1. Or we can use rows. Let's say we want to select the entire row number 10, like that. As you see now, we've selected the entire row number 10. Now, do not confuse the columns and rows properties with the column and row, which is actually returning the number of the column or the number of the row for a range. So for example, if we want to get the column number of range T11, we write column in singular. If we put that in a message box and we run the macro, we get number 20 because column T is the column number 20. Another very useful property to reference a range or a cell more specifically is the offset property. With offset, we can target a cell which is a number of columns or a number of rows from a reference range or cell. So for example, if we get the product ID in row 4, let's say the product ID 34 for this product, and we want to get the date when it was sold, we would do something like this. So we set the product ID reference as range A4 in this case. And to target the cell with the date, we would do prod ID ref.offset, and first is the number of rows, which in this case is 0, and then the number of columns, which in this case is 2, to get to the date column. And for example, we can get the value if we put that in a message box. And that's ref. We get the date, which is in cell C4. Another very useful property to target a range is current region. So let me put that in a separate module. So current region allows to target the entire range with data from any of the cells within that range. So for example, if I say range A1 current region and select, this is going to select the entire range with data where A1 belongs to. So as you see, it's selecting this big table with data, but it's not selecting the other data down here because there is actually an empty column in between. So if instead of A1 we say G6, and we run the macro, now you see it has selected that region. And this property is related to a property of the worksheet object, which is used range. So in sheet 1, if we have use range and select, this is, and let me comment this one here. Now this is going to select everything on that worksheet, including those other two tables here. So that's the used range in this worksheet. However, current region would only select this table if the reference cell is within this table, or this other table if the reference cell is within this other table. So these two properties are very useful to target the data, especially when you have a lot of data in the worksheet. But the difference is that this is a property of the worksheet object. So as you see, there's no range reference here, while this one is specific of a particular range or cell. There's yet another very useful property, and I'm going to put it in a separate procedure here. Range object, special cells. And that's the special cells method. That allows to target specific cells such as blanks, only visible cells, cells with a specific format, and so on. Let's have a look at that. So if we go to range A1 to age 40, and we go for special cells, when we add the parentheses we have here, we get here the different possibilities. As you see, we can target the last cell with data in that range. We can target only visible cells, and this is very useful when working with filters. We're going to see more of that soon. We can target only the blanks, or we can target cells with comments or with formulas and several other. For example, having the same format conditions or the same validation. So let's see a couple of examples with special cells, but let me go to another sheet, and probably I'm going to use this table now here. And imagine we have some blanks here and here, for example. We could use special cells type blanks on that range, let's say A1 to B5, to target those two blank cells in this case. Now there's just a problem with the special cells. If there are no blank cells, it will return an error. So let me go back here and add the data. If we run the macro now, as you see, it returns a runtime error and it says no cells were found. No cells with blanks were found. So to avoid that when using special cells, you can add some kind of condition here, or you can also add an on error resume next statement. So now nothing happens. While if we have blanks, it will select the blank cells. Now let's see another example. Let's say we want to filter the data. Go into data, filter, and we're going to filter by month. We only want to see June and July. And then despite the table is in this range, we only want to get those visible cells now. So we would use special cells, Excel cell type visible in this case. And let's say we want to change the color just for those. VB red, for example. And if we run the macro now, let's comment that here. We get everything visible in red, also the header. But if we show all, we see we didn't turn red the cells that were hidden. So this was targeting only the visible cells, including the header, of course, because that's visible. We would change here A2 if we don't want to change the color of the header. And we can use special cells and any of the other properties and combine them together. Let me give you an example. For example, if we say range A through B, and this would cover the entire two columns, A and B, and we want to target the last row with data, we would use special cells, Excel cell type, last cell only, and this would actually target the last cell in the range, which is B5, but we want to get the number of the row. So then we would combine this with the row property. And if we put this in a message box and run the macro, we get number 5, which is the last row with content in these two columns. We can also combine the current region property that we've seen earlier. So let's say A1 current region, and then special cells. For example, we can target cells with formulas. But we do not have any formula, so I'm going to add some formulas here. So I'm going to add a commission from the amount, which is going to be 10%. And if we run the macro, it selects the cells with formulas. Okay, so we've seen several ways to target a range or a cell with data. And now that we know how to do that, We can get values, add values, clear, copy, paste, etc. We're going to see how to do all that in the next video. Thanks for watching.